Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. This is your 5-minute warning, so find a space, 5 minutes to find a space. Thank you.
Shalom, salam, and welcome everyone to Congregation Beth Ahabah. I am Julie Mullion, President of the Board of Managers here at Beth Ahabah, and we are honored to share this sacred space with our community to stand together against anti-Semitism. As many of you may know, Beth Ahabah translates from the Hebrew to house of love. So what an appropriate place to gather in solidarity against all manifestations of hate here in our community and throughout the world. Thank you to all of our federal, state, and local officials, friends and leaders from our faith partners in the Richmond area, and of course, to all of our Jewish community, friends and family members for being here today. Just a few quick housekeeping notes. A single-use, all-gender restroom is located just out the main sanctuary doors to your right. Also, please note that the exits are located at the rear of the sanctuary through the vestibule, unless, of course, you need a ramp and you may go through the main lobby. As we have quite a robust and exciting program, I'll turn it over to our talented cantor, Sarah Beck-Berman, for a prayer.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Cantor Sarah Beck-Berman, and I'm part of the clergy team here at Congregation Beth Ahabah. Welcome to all of you. A prayer for today and every day to respect the human dignity of others, no matter our differences or disagreements, and to strive for love as the foundation of all our deeds. This is called We Are Loved, a poem by Rabbi Rami Shapiro set to music by Rabbi Shir Yaakov Fait. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. We are embraced by arms that find us, even when we are hidden from ourselves. We are touched by fingers that soothe us, even when we are too proud for soothing. We are counseled by voices that guide us, even when we are too embittered to hear. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. We are supported by hands that uplift us, even in the midst of a fall. We are urged on by eyes that meet us, even when we are too weak for meeting. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. Embraced, touched, soothed, and counseled, ours are the arms, the fingers, the voices. Ours are the hands, the eyes, the smiles. We are loved by an unending love. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. Amen. I turn it over to our program MC, Amy Melnick-Scharf, Chair of the Jewish Community Relations Committee here in Richmond.
Thank you, Cantor. That was truly inspiring and a tough act to follow. I promise nobody wants to hear me sing. Good evening. Finally, we were visiting our family in New York for the Father's Day weekend. It was post-COVID, it was the Melnick-Scharf reunification tour, and it was fabulous to see the extended family. But then I heard these shocking words from my niece, Miri. "Aunt Amy, there's no future for us here anymore. I'm afraid to walk the streets with my family. I'm afraid for my boys. I am afraid." Thank you all for joining us here today. Special welcome to our guests, Senator Kaine, Representative Spanberger, Representative Good, members of the General Assembly, county officials, partners, clergy, and the media. We are all here today united against hate. I never thought I would hear those words from my niece. I never thought I would hear that she is afraid to walk her neighborhood streets because of her long dress, her headscarf, her husband's and son's little boys' kippah and tzitzit. I never thought I would hear that my own niece was afraid to be Jewish. I grew up with the feeling and the belief that this is the land of opportunity, the land my grandparents and great-grandparents, fleeing oppression and persecution, place where they could practice their Judaism and thrive fully and completely. The Golden Medina, my grandma called it. But you see, I can hide my Judaism. I can pass. My dear niece Miri and her family, like so many other Jewish people, they cannot. Anti-Semitism is not a new phenomena, we know that. But since the recent unrest in Israel and Gaza, Miri and her family now live in fear when they walk the streets. They are worried they could have rocks thrown at them or even be beaten. They could be evil or, in a sick twist, be called Nazis. They are worried that they could be the next targets for violence simply because they are Jewish. Not Israeli, but Jewish, plain and simple. We know that Jewish people and institutions have been targeted throughout the country. We know that members of our own Jewish community here have been verbally assaulted walking down our very own Patterson Avenue. And we know that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and the FBI and the Virginia police know it too. Whether anti-Semitism comes in the form of old age hatred against the Jewish people, or in the form of more modern myths and stereotypes about Israel, we must stand up to such attacks against our community. On June 9th, the Anti-Defamation League released some astonishingly disturbing statistics. 60% of American Jews have personally witnessed an act of anti-Semitism, either in person or online, during the recent conflict in Israel and Gaza. 41% of American Jews surveyed indicated they're more concerned about their personal safety because of the anti-Semitism arising out of the recent conflict. Let me be clear. Judaism is inextricably linked with the state of Israel, the Jewish homeland. If this rise in violence against Jews in America and around the globe does not prove that, I do not know what else will. But also, let me be clear, everyone has a right to criticize Israel, its democratic government, policies, politicians. That's not anti-Semitic. We criticize these things here, and trust me, they do very much so in Israel as well. However, that's not what American Jews and around the globe have been hearing in response to this very distressing and violent conflict. What we have heard is that, quote, Israel does not have a right to exist. Israel should be wiped off the map. Israel is a white European colonial power that has no ties to this land, and Israel is committing genocide. all of that is anti-Semitic. Because that implies that Jews don't have a right to exist, that we should be wiped off the face of the earth. And it denies the basic historical fact that the land is claimed by two indigenous people. It denies the fact that over half the Israel's population is from the Middle East itself, or from Israel and not from Europe. And asserting that Israel is committing genocide is not only disgusting and offensive, it's inaccurate, wholly inaccurate. It denigrates the memory of those who have perished in genocides like the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, and currently what is happening against the Uyghur people. Comparing these very real horrific genocides to the situation in Israel and Gaza is a lie that needs to be forcibly opposed. No amount of hateful rhetoric, memes, slogans, and no amount of demonization, delegitimization of Israel will help the people of Gaza, the West Bank, or the people of Israel progress towards peace. We unite together today and we pray for peace, both here at home and for peace abroad between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Peace is achieved by two sides, building bridges of opportunity and partnership. And that's what the Federation does. Each and every day, we work to build bridges and find the common humanity between us all, the love that Cantor Berman sang so beautifully about. God has truly made all of us in God's image, and so the differences among us are minute compared to our similarities. What we want for our children is the same, and should be to live in peace and security. Years ago, the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory was asked by the then New York City Mayor David Dinkins, how do we build bridges between both of our communities despite our hostilities? And the Rebbe responded, forget that it is both sides. It is one side. We are one people. Is there much work to be done to accomplish this? Of course. But we, Federation, will continue to do this work. This is what we do. We work together here in Richmond with our neighbors, our partners, our government, and our community together. We all know the rhetoric I have described and the anti-Semitic and other hateful attacks against other communities that have occurred in the US and are not what we want here in Richmond and in the great Commonwealth of Virginia. And that is why this day is as much about hope as it is about standing up against hate and for peace. The great Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of United Kingdom said it best. We must answer hatred with love, violence with peace, resentment with generosity of spirit, and conflict with reconciliation. I want to thank you all for being here again. I want to thank our elected officials, our interfaith and community partners for being with us here today. We know that your presence means you do not tolerate hate in any form, and we are all here today united against hate. The Federation will continue to advocate for our community's security, for the welfare of those less fortunate. We will continue to stand up against hate of any kind, and we will continue to support Israel's quest for peace, security, and encourage our elected leaders to do so as well. With the latest incidents of anti-Semitic violence, it may be time for the Commonwealth to consider legislation to establish a specific Virginia Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission and work with the General Assembly to adopt the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. I will close with another quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Quote, the greatest single antidote to violence is conversation, speaking our fears, listening to the fears of others, and in that, sharing of vulnerabilities, discovering a genesis of hope. Alone, we can only do so much, but together we can stand up against injustice, we can fight hate together, and we can pray for peace. Thank you. As I mentioned, we are blessed this evening to have incredible bipartisan representation from our elected officials, from interfaith partners and community leaders. We know we're not going to agree on every issue facing our community and our country. However, we are here tonight, this evening, in solidarity. And I ask all of us to have grace and respect for all of our speakers this evening. We'll begin with our federal legislators, move on to our local elected officials, community interfaith partners, and then our community allies. We are foregoing formal introductions, so they're going to be very super brief. And again, everything is available online if you want to see more detailed bios. So we will start with Senator Tim Kaine, former mayor, lieutenant governor, and now senator, Richmond's own. Please join us. And all speakers come up through the center. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to thank Amy for her kind words, and I look out at this congregation at Beth Ahabah and see so many friends. Thank you to the Federation for pulling this together, and thank you to Beth Ahabah for hosting. I've often stood here with you as you have been the host year after year of Community Learning Week celebration of the life of Reverend Martin Luther King. And just as you have advocated for others, we are here in solidarity with you. And sadly, we've been here before. My parents live in Kansas City. In 2014, about 3 miles from their house, a white supremacist killed 3 people outside a Jewish community center and a retirement home, just really right in their neighborhood. In 2017, at the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally that was ostensibly about Confederate statues, worshipers at Friday night services and Saturday services at a Jewish synagogue in Charlottesville, and Hillel students that were just coming to UVA, many were freshmen who were just coming to campus for the first time, had to endure rioters chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and other chants from Nazi youth rallies from the 1930s. In October 2018, we were horrified by the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh that killed 11 people. We've seen vandalism of synagogues and Jewish cemeteries and community centers, not just in Virginia, and I've been to, for example, the Jewish Community Center in Northern Virginia, as they've suffered repeated vandalism, or the Gesher Community Day School in Northern Virginia. But not just in Virginia, but around the country and around the world. There was the presence of some extremely vicious anti-Semites during the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. One of the most notable was an individual wearing a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt. He was arrested. He was a Virginian. And we've seen, as Amy mentioned, a recent uptick in attacks on U.S. Jews during the latest round of tragic, heartbreaking violence in Israel and Palestine. Anti-Semitic attacks in the United States are among the most common hate crimes reported by the Virginia State Police, by the FBI, year after year after year. I've stood publicly against anti-Semitism. I authored a resolution with Ted Cruz that passed the Senate unanimously in June of 2019, and I co-sponsored a similar resolution authored by Jackie Rosen and James Langford, bipartisan colleagues of mine, that just passed the Senate unanimously in recent weeks. And I've also used my position on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to push for more State Department investment in combating anti-Semitism in Europe and around the world. And we beefed up efforts just recently, again in a bipartisan way, to combat hate, to measure and then combat hate crimes in the country. But let me be candid, those efforts aren't working, or at least they're not sufficient. And I've really been grappling with why not. I've embarked on a set of discussions beginning with the Jewish community in Charlottesville 10 days ago to try to get deeper on this topic of why have not the condemnations and the efforts thus far been effective. And here are 5 questions that I want to dialogue about so I can learn how to be more effective in not just condemning or standing against anti-Semitism. That sets the bar too low. We need to defeat anti-Semitism. First question, some prejudices fade in America. There were signs that said no Irish need apply. And there was anti-Catholic bigotry that was once very, very common in our country. But I've not suffered either. The bias against Catholics and the bias against Irish have faded. There was intense prejudice against Germans during World War I. State legislators were passing laws forbidding the instruction in the German language. But by World War II, we interred Japanese Americans and not Germans. The prejudice against German Americans faded. But some prejudices persist over decades, even centuries. Anti-Semitism, discrimination against people of color, anti-AAPI bigotry, anti-Muslim bigotry. Why does anti-Semitism persist and reoccur here and elsewhere around the world? Second question, how can we separate deeply held opinions about issues in other countries, particularly in this case Israel, Palestine, and the Middle East, from how we treat each other here in the United States? Third question, this is a painful one as a Catholic. What is the role that Christians should play in humbly acknowledging that much anti-Semitism flows from decidedly Christian stereotypes and grievances? What special obligations do we as Christians have to atone for those past injustices by being frontline advocates for our Jewish friends and neighbors? Fourth question, too many of us who battle against prejudice do not consider anti-Semitism as a matter of the same urgency as racism or homophobia or xenophobia. Why not? Fifth question, how can we create effective strategies to battle anti-Semitism that also help us target other forms of religious bigotry, prejudice against Muslims, prejudice against Sikhs and others? And I know there are many more important questions too. In the Senate, we formed the Senate Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, 58 of us, completely bipartisan. And I repeat that our goal is not just to condemn anti-Semitism, we need to defeat it. And I look forward to dialogue with Richmond community leaders, just as I've begun in Charlottesville, about how we can do this together. And we have to do this, not just to protect Jewish Americans from discrimination and violence. We should do it to model a cardinal virtue of our country, the First Amendment principle born out of the Statute of Religious Freedom passed here in Virginia, that we are a nation where people can worship or not as they please without being preferred or punished for the choice that they make. It's a virtue that we've gifted to the world. It's still the case that here in America, you can attend school with, live next door to, work side by side with people of all different faiths. And with all our faults, we generally make it work well when other nations of the world are still really struggling with how to do this. Our strength of example, if we commit to it, try to get better at it, can be powerful for the world. Our example can be good or bad, but it can be powerful for the world. I close just with these simple words from Psalm 133. How wonderful it is for God's people to dwell together in unity. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Senator Kaine, and we do look forward to dialoguing with you on these very important topics. Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger from the 7th District, representing Henrico, Chesterfield, and the surrounding 8 counties.
Good evening, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all as we join together as a community to put us on the path towards what Senator Kaine was talking about, which is the ultimate defeat of anti-Semitism. Because it isn't enough to denounce it, it isn't enough to stand up against it. It has to be our goal to defeat it. I have long been very interested in the history of the Holocaust. I have read an array of books. I lived in Germany, everything from In the Garden of Beasts to Hitler's Willing Executioners. I spent significant time trying to understand how a community could turn against their neighbors, how we could see the mass murder of children, of families, of community members, community leaders. And what I have always found so dismaying is the fact that it starts slowly. The degradation, the othering, the words that just make a distinction, it starts slowly, as it did in Nazi Germany, as it did in other places throughout the world. And Senator Kaine spoke of so many incidents throughout our country, here in Virginia, where we have seen words, anger, vitriol, othering, doing the bidding of darkness and anger and hatred. That same darkness and anger and hatred that in decades past have led to the murder of so many. And it's in ideology and conspiracies and a distancing from the truth. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to stand before you as a representative representing many of you to say the truth is that we need to recognize the danger for what it is. We need to denounce the words, the othering, any effort to make a division within our community, any break from truth or reality that might create fertile ground for the hate, the anger, the animosity that leads to events like what we saw in Charlottesville, that leads to events like the murder of congregants of the Tree of Life, that leads to people like Amy's niece feeling unsafe to walk down the street. And so, as long as I am a representative in our community, as long as I am a member of our community, and as long as I am breathing, I will continue to stand up for the fact that no person should feel that type of fear. No young person should decide whether or not they're going to put a mezuzah on their door in their dormitory out of fear or not, because we are a vibrant nation where for centuries people have come to start anew with vibrancy and hope, and we owe it to our generations here and generations to come to ensure that we are that nation that provides that safe refuge and that future where we are ultimately defeating anti-Semitism. So I am grateful for the chance to stand before you to denounce the anger, the othering, the words that lead to the violence and the division. And I am grateful for the chance to be here with this community. I thank you all. I'm so sorry for the hurt and the pain, but I do look forward to answering some of these hard questions that face our community and defeating, ultimately, anti-Semitism within our community, our country, and ultimately the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman Spanberger. Up next is Congressman Bob Good, representing the 5th Congressional District, includes Charlottesville, the largest district in Virginia. Welcome, Congressman Good.
Thank you. It is a true pleasure and a true privilege to be here. And I want to thank the Jewish Community Foundation, or Federation rather, for inviting me. My friend Sam Richardson, who's here tonight, who was kind of the intermediary there to extend that invitation. I see Sam there back in the center. Growing up as a Christian, I grew up with great admiration and respect for the nation of Israel and our Christian brothers, and reading the scriptures about how God gave the 10 Commandments to the nation of Israel, to the Jewish people, and it is really a privilege to be here. My first time in a synagogue, and so thank you for having me with you here tonight. I am unwavering in my support of Israel, their sovereignty, their commitment to democracy, the only true democracy in the Middle East, and in recognition of their right to have their capital in Jerusalem. Israel Israel has the absolute right and obligation to defend itself and its people, the absolute right, again, to select the location of its capital, and to defend its borders and its territory and to protect its people. I can remember after 9/11, 20 years ago, and hearing the then Prime Minister say, what you went through on 9/11, proportionally, we go through every year. And I thought about that and how incredible that was. What we suffered so deeply, proportionally, Israel suffers every year. There is absolutely no equivalency between Israel and her enemies who commit terrorist acts, deny Israel's rights to exist, and seek its elimination. Israel should never be encouraged or pressured to trade land for peace. These enemies that surround Israel, Israel is surrounded by those who seek to destroy it. Those enemies only understand and respect strength, and I fully support our continued security assistance for Israel. I'm a co-sponsor of H.R. 2718, the Maximum Pressure Act, which is the toughest sanctions ever placed against Iran, one of Israel's greatest enemies. And this would codify or continue President Trump's successful maximum pressure campaign against Iran. I also wrote legislation during my first 6 months here in Congress to prohibit the U.S. from entering into another disastrous nuclear agreement with Iran. The bill is H.R. 3465, the Iran-China Accountability Act. I'm a co-sponsor of 3 other bills in Congress condemning Hamas and supporting Israel, supporting democracy and condemning terrorism in Iran, meaning supporting the fight for democracy among the people in Iran and condemning terrorism there, and also a bill replenishing the Iron Dome protecting Israel. I've joined 6 other letters to our current administration supporting Israel and condemning actions by or support for its enemies. And I am deeply concerned by the anti-Semitic rhetoric coming from this Congress and members of this Congress from the other side, quite frankly, who equate U.S. and Israel with terrorist groups like Hamas and the Taliban. As a born-again Christian and as a conservative Republican, I recognize that we are a group tonight of folks from different backgrounds, different faiths, and different political views, as already has been acknowledged. But we can and should be united in condemning and fighting against all violence, especially that which takes place in the name of race or religion. We can be united in condemning and fighting against attacks against our law enforcement. I'm thankful to have some of them here tonight protecting us and keeping us safe. And we can be united in condemning and fighting against all racism, all hate-based attacks, including anti-Semitism. And we can and must be united in support of the sanctity of all life, of all life, and the belief that we are all created equal before God and equal before the law, and united in recognizing the importance of faith and the traditional family, the protection of religious freedom, and respect for the rule of law in our nation, this nation. Never in the history of the world has a nation been more welcoming and provided more opportunity for people from all races, all ethnic backgrounds than the United States has. We're imperfect, and we're working on those imperfections, but there's never been a nation in the history of the world that's been more welcoming and provided more opportunity for people from all backgrounds, all races, all ethnicities. So we can be united in recognizing and celebrating that this is a nation whose unique founding as a constitutional republic founded on Judeo-Christian principles that seeks to preserve what made us the greatest nation in the history of the world, that protects and provides the opportunity for us to come together tonight and unite together against anti-Semitism. And thank you for allowing me to be with you tonight. God bless you. May God continue to bless the United States of America, and may God continue to bless Israel.
Thank you, Congressman Good. Now we'll shift to our local representatives. Senator Siobhan Dunavant, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you so much for asking me to be here tonight. I'm deeply honored, and I'm glad that we're coming together to have this conversation. We are all here to unite against hate. We're called to do this. In so many ways, it's the work of our time for our children, ideology and politics aside. Of course, that sounds so simple and easy to agree with, but hate is always possible and feeds on ignorance and apathy and fear. It's somehow a part of the dark side of every human that they're capable of hate and violence and atrocities, and that's why we all must be constantly vigilant, personally responsible, and fearlessly challenging. Our silence is all that hate needs to succeed. Words matter, and they can create tolerance to hate and can beget violence. It's so contrary to every religious faith and the principles of America that we focus on finding out how we are different and finding ways to hate based on those differences. It's everywhere. We thrive in an America where all are valued and treated with dignity. It's not enough to call out some hate. We have to call out all hate. If we can't do that, we aren't serious about this, and we lose all credibility. If you're calling for Israel to be destroyed or quoting Hamas on Twitter, you're trafficking in hate. And that shouldn't be a controversial point to make. Maybe they speak out of ignorance, but they must be informed and still held accountable. We must speak up. That's why we're here tonight. It's a choice and a discipline to nurture the best in ourselves and others and reject the ever-present push to hatred. But we must also remember some groups pretend to be condemning hate, but their own core ideologies are based on hate, and we should never fail to be afraid to call that out too, wherever they exist. This requires courage, and it requires hard work, and it requires us to reject lazy comparisons and simplistic frameworks, but we cannot allow our time or our children's future to be poisoned. Israel's the only democratic nation in the Middle East. They're not a perfect nation. No country is. But they're an outpost of freedom, and they face enemies like Hamas that have pledged openly their commitment to absolute obliteration. There has to be a starting point of mutual respect and value. Coexist and obliteration are polar opposites. And while Hamas does not represent all of Palestine, Israel is home to all Jews. And obliteration is not just anti-Israel, it's anti-Semitic. We say it's time to stand up to hatred. We should not hesitate to say that that means standing up to bigots who would discriminate or harm on the basis of any reason. We should not hesitate to say that means standing up to organizations and ideologies in the Middle East that believe in wiping out an entire nation. It's not enough to call out some hate. We have to call out all hate. If we can't do that, skipping ahead, that's a repeat. It's a good time for all of us to come together. All hatred is wrong. Let's start there. Let's say that. Let's mean that. That's how true progress will be made, and that's how we will make that progress together. Shalom.
Thank you, Senator Dunavant. Now we'll have Senator Ghazala Hashmi.
Good evening. Thank you to the members of the Jewish Community Federation for inviting me to speak today, Senator Kane, Representative Spanberger, and other elected officials, and members of our interfaith and inclusive communities. It's a true honor for me to join you this evening in this historic house of worship, a temple whose very name means house of love. As one of the oldest synagogues in the United States, Beth Ahabah has weathered the tumult of Virginia's history, including the Civil War and 2 world wars, one of which surely caused incomprehensible suffering and grief to the members of this congregation. This temple has stood as Richmond made its uneasy march towards expanded civil rights and racial justice, desegregation, and integration of more inclusive values and social ideals that reflect the true common bonds of our shared human experience. Clearly, we still have much work ahead. The roads that lead us to compassion, justice, equity, and love of our neighbors are not built on smooth stones, nor are they laid down in straight or easily comprehensible lines. Sometimes we encounter obstacles that lead us away from dialogue or mutual understanding. But it is incumbent upon each of us to acknowledge that we are traveling on similar roads, and though we may have been handed dissimilar maps, and though we sometimes have been taught to read those maps differently from one another, our ultimate destination ought to be the same. It is the destination of our common community, marked by mutual respect and acknowledgement that we are one family, and the awareness that we cannot be at ease when our own brothers and sisters are suffering. Richmond, with all of its complexities of history, and Virginia, with its wealth of diverse peoples, has room for all of us, but it has no room for hatred or intolerance. And as a member of the General Assembly, I reassure you that we will stand united against anti-Semitism and against hate speech and assault that targets this community of faith. Hate crimes are particularly pernicious in nature because they seek to instill fear, not just within a few individuals, but the larger goal of hate crimes is to increase fear and concern within the broader community. And as Virginians, we must join collectively in renouncing and exposing the tactics of intimidation, bigotry, and hatred based on religious or ethnic identities. We've taken steps recently in the General Assembly to address these concerns, and one such step is the establishment of the Advisory Committee on Culturally Relevant and Inclusive Education Practices. And this committee has been tasked with significant goals, including that we ensure that Virginia's students are taught about the historical underpinnings of the Holocaust and other historical genocides, so that future generations understand how hate, ridicule, and dehumanization can lead to larger acts of violence, including state-sponsored discrimination. It is incumbent upon all of us to share the narratives of history that we may remember, learn, and craft communities of tolerance and inclusion. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of our inescapable network of mutuality and of the ways in which we are all tied in a single garment of destiny. This single garment of destiny must be woven with compassion, stitched together with seams of understanding, and made firm by our mutual commitment to justice and equity for all who live within our community. And although we have moments in our shared history and experiences in this city that cause us anxiety, I'm consistently reassured by the many faces of friendship that I see here today. Individuals and organizations who meet time and time again to renounce hatred, who work consistently to strengthen the bonds of dialogue, and who are here once again to reaffirm our pledge to stand together and alongside each other as we confront those who seek to divide us. Thank you for allowing me to join you.
Thank you, Senator Hashmi. Please welcome Delegate LaCherice Aird.
Good evening, and thank you so much to the Jewish Community Federation of Richmond for inviting me to participate in what is such an important and momentous conversation. Tonight, I am struck once again by the spirit of hospitality and fellowship that reverberates throughout this sacred space. As I think about all the many comments that have already been made before me, when I think about all the smiles and hugs, especially after the past year as we entered upon this space, I'm reminded that God's love is present in the humanity, kindness, and generosity of all people. Because God's transcendent love is a force more dynamic than any other, despite the many challenges and barriers we're all here to talk about that we're facing upon us at this time. In times of trepidation, His love calms us. In times of sorrow, His warmth comforts us. And in times of uncertainty, like now, God's light guides us. And as we bear witness to the sinister episodes of anti-Semitism erupting in our communities throughout our Commonwealth and around our nation, I am also reminded that honoring God means refusing to remain silent in the face of injustice, no matter where it may be. Because when we stand together against bigotry and hatred, we are standing with God. Our solidarity is our most powerful tool to combat the surge of evil. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, our unity is born of our common struggle to make oppression of any people by others an impossibility. My friends, I have spent my time in public service advocating for a more equitable, just, and prosperous Commonwealth for us all. But in that time, it has become clear that there is still so much for us to do to come together, hand in hand, to stand up for our shared dream of a safe and peaceful world, in a way more powerful than we have ever before. Only then can we truly extinguish the fires of hatred. Tonight, I join the others who have come before me, and I promise you that I will not rest until we have made it through this darkness together and arrive at a place where no one lives with the fear that their very existence could jeopardize their safety. In closing, these words can never be repeated enough, and that is the words of the great Jewish thinker and writer, Elie Wiesel. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps our oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Mindful of this call to action, I stand in solidarity with the Jewish community, and I denounce anti-Semitism and hate of any kind against any group of people and call on others to do the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate Aird. Next up is Delegate John McGuire. And just as a reminder, please come up through the center stairs. Thank you.
Well, it truly is an honor to be here today. I want to remind everyone here that evil does exist. And the only thing evil needs to prevail is for good men and women to sit by and do nothing. So we as a community, as a people, as a nation, we've got to keep an eye on each other. I want to also remind you, you cannot fight hate with more hate. Will we agree with that? You cannot fight racism with more racism. And I think I heard Amy say it earlier that we need more love. So let's, in the spirit of that, we do live in the greatest country where a man or a woman can work hard and achieve just about anything. I'm a veteran and I speak from my military experience. If somebody saved your life on the battlefield, you wouldn't care about their skin color, you wouldn't care if they were male or female, fast or slow, tall or short, or what their religious or political belief is. Now, I'm a constitutional conservative, and I'm very strong into protecting and defending the U.S. Constitution that I swore oath to protect. But people ask me all the time, are you a Democrat or Republican? I tell them I'm an American. Because as a veteran, we fight for and serve all Americans. Well, I want to say it's an honor to be here with everyone today as we come together to stand against anti-Semitism in our Commonwealth. Sadly, the recent attacks on Israel have caused anti-Semitism to rear its ugly head again in our communities and around the world. And I was really saddened about a month ago when Israel was attacked. As a veteran, I served with the Israeli Defense Force, and I had the huge honor of visiting Israel for 10 days 2 years ago with my wife, Tracy. And I got to tell you, if it was only 3 days, it would have been life-changing. But you hear a lot of things in the media about Israel. But what I found out in Israel is that there are many different religions there. There are Christians, there are Muslims, and everyone else. And I had some Muslim folks that I made friends with who said they believe they have more freedom in Israel than any other country in the Middle East. Israel is an incredible country. Would you guys agree with that? And I was deeply saddened when Israel was attacked by terrorists and leaders in our country condemned Israel for defending itself and its people. And that is ridiculous. It seems like the world is upside down and inside out with some of these crazy policies. Israel has a right to protect and defend its people, just like the United States has a right to protect and defend people in the United States. And I'm here to tell you that I stand with Israel and the Jewish people, especially in Virginia and in our communities. As a veteran, I know I shouldn't joke this way, but I'm much better with a rifle than giving a speech. But I'll tell you this, I didn't spend 10 years as a Navy SEAL to allow this kind of hate to go unchecked in America. And please know that I stand with you and Israel in this fight against anti-Semitism. And I will continue fighting to ensure all Americans, including Virginia's Jewish communities, have the opportunity to live, work, raise their families, and worship in peace. So God bless you and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate McGuire. And now please welcome Rabbi Hal Shevitz, Richmond Council of Congregational Rabbis and Congregation or Atid.
It's wonderful to be here. It's actually my first time in this room as well because I'm always working when you're working. I'd like to confess something to you this evening. I used to be an anti-Semitism denier. You see, I was a child of the 1980s and 1990s, 2 generations separated from the Shoah, the Holocaust, when the world took notice of anti-Semitism. This was a time when survivors were speaking about their experiences, and the state of Israel was a symbol of hope for all Jews. I was in middle school when the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum opened and when Schindler's List was in movie theaters and won the Academy Award for Best Picture of the Year. My family came to the United States in the early 20th century, and I had no family that experienced any anti-Jewish persecution for 100 years. I grew up in a time when American Jews collectively came together to free millions of our fellow Jews from Soviet Russia with the full support of the American government. I experienced the hope that came with the Oslo Accords when it seemed like Israel might actually make peace with its Palestinian neighbors. Of course, you might have heard about people occasionally saying an anti-Jewish thing here or there, but those incidents were few and far between. Every year at the Passover Seder, one line of the Haggadah in particular seemed antiquated and anachronistic to me. For it was not just one enemy who has risen up to destroy us, but rather in every generation they rise up against us to destroy us, and the Holy Blessed One saves us from their hands. For much of my youth, I thought, not my generation, that doesn't happen anymore. Growing up, it really felt like anti-Semitism had been relegated to the dustbin of history. As recent years have shown us, that era was the exception rather than the new normal. This is an anxious time for the Jewish people. Jew hatred is all around us, and it's a reminder of what our people have had to live with and live through for thousands of years. It comes from the political left and the political right. It comes from people who are intentional about what they say and do, and it comes from people who are ignorant about why they even dislike us. It is based in deep-seated millennial hatreds and current misinformation about the state of Israel, the way it defends itself, and its quest for peace with its neighbors. We were reminded of this 4 years ago during the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville when neo-Nazis chanted, "Jews will not replace us." We were reminded of this as we heard about each of the violent attacks on Jews praying in synagogues over the past few years. We are reminded of this when observant Jews who wear traditional garb are attacked on a daily basis on the streets of New York and other cities, like right here in Richmond, even by those of other minority communities. We have been reminded of this most recently during Israel's latest conflict with the terrorist group Hamas, when many on the far left and those from mostly progressive communities spread lies about Israel and accused the Jewish state of apartheid, war crimes, and violating human rights. Let's be clear, there is no moral ambiguity when an internationally recognized terrorist organization intentionally attacks Jews and the Jewish state, and Israel defends itself as is its right. Even so, common sense would say that what happens 6,000 miles away should not affect us here, and yet it has. The lies that are spread by the media and television personalities with large audiences have sparked an ancient powder keg. It is open season on Jews in America through word and sometimes through deed. Even more troubling is that those who are often our allies either have been silent or have sparked this powder keg. Now, Israelis, they know how to deal with it. They are battle-hardened. They know what it's like to be attacked every day and hated by the world. It is certainly not easy, and it definitely takes its toll, but Israelis are used to the rhetoric and the violence. We American Jews, not so much. This is the land of the free, where religious difference is celebrated, where ethnic difference should not matter, and which proclaims to bigotry no sanction, to use the words of George Washington to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island in 1790. Some might say that the last few decades have made us American Jews complacent and have caused us to let down our guard or maybe live in denial of the existence of Jew hatred. And when in doubt, we should look to the Torah, our ancient source of wisdom, for some guidance. While hatred for Jews per se was not a major challenge in the ancient world, the Torah provides us with many instances of people or groups that worked to undermine or defeat Israel. Most famously, there were the pharaohs of Egypt, one of whom enslaved Israel because he believed they would conspire to overthrow him, and another who embittered their lives with harsh labor, fearing their numbers and God's protection of them. Torah also teaches about those who hate Israel for no good reason and want to do them harm simply for being different. Among these are the people of Amalek, who attacked the children and the elders of Israel on their journey out of Egypt. We can also count among this group Balak, a Moabite king whom we read about in synagogues yesterday. He saw the Israelites coming, did not want them in his land, and enlisted Balaam, a prophet for hire, to curse Israel. The week before, the Torah spoke about the rebellion of Korach, a relative of Moses and Aaron, who criticized them for taking power for themselves with the unanswerable question, aren't all of God's congregation holy? He was criticizing power for his own sake, all while imagining that he and his cohort would take charge after tearing down the structures entrusted to Moses and Aaron. Among these categories, the easiest to identify is Pharaoh. He's the most famous. We know his story best. We've seen the movies. Pharaoh is a supremacist and proud to boast about how much greater he and his people are than anyone else. Beyond his words, Pharaoh will use violent means to suppress Israel and subjugate them because he fears their greatness. As scary as Pharaoh can be, we Jews have learned how to identify this threat and stand up to him. Furthermore, it has been easy to muster allies in our struggles against someone like Pharaoh because there are usually many other groups who Pharaoh hates and demeans. However, threats like Amalek and Balak are harder to see coming because there are often no warning signs. Even so, when overt attacks happen, people come to our aid. In many cases, the most challenging threat is that of Korach, whose rhetoric of universal holiness and equality is attractive and resonates with the egalitarian impulses within us. His simple messages ring true in an era when people don't have the patience for complicated realities. This is why many people are swayed to his side. As different as they might seem, Pharaoh and Korach are saying the same things. They both fear Jewish power and agency and its structures. Pharaoh fears Israel and wants to remove Jews from power by any means necessary. Korach is criticizing power for its own sake, and in his own alluring rhetoric is accusing Moses and Aaron of being violators of equality, holiness, and in the parlance of our time, human rights. Both are libelous against Jews. Now, we will never be so lucky as to have God bail us out against today's Pharaohs and Korachs. God doesn't do special effects anymore. The 10 plagues aren't coming for Pharaoh, nor will the ground open up and swallow Korach. However, today we have something different to aid us in our fight against Jew hatred. In the years after the horrors of the Shoah, the phrase "never again" became popular. Never again does not mean that hatred will never again exist. We might have thought that in our naivete, but that conclusion has been proven wrong. Rather, this declaration means that we will never again let others' hate determine our fate. We will never again be silent. We will always ensure that we have a voice and a way of defending ourselves. Not only should we be thinking in terms of never again, but we should also be thinking in terms of never before. Despite the rise of anti-Semitism in this moment in America, there has never before been a more prosperous and successful time for the Jewish people than ours. Never before have the Jewish people had sovereignty and a strong state of our own, a shield, a refuge, and a home that affords those who live there to thrive and create, and those who live elsewhere to derive pride and esteem from it. Never before in the diaspora have Jews had so much personal and collective liberty. Never before could we diaspora Jews share a stage with elected officials at all levels of government who support our defense and our cause. Never before have we had immediate Jewish family members of the highest office holders in the land. Never before have so many leaders and members from so many faith traditions come together to work to live peacefully in the most diverse, multi-faith, multi-ethnic society in human experience. In yesterday's reading from the Torah, the prophet Balaam says about the people of Israel, "It is a people that dwells alone, not reckoned among the nations." Sometimes it certainly feels that way, especially when you're being targeted. However, in expressions of solidarity like this evening, I am comforted that we have allies in the fight against the forces of demonization and hate, and that acceptance and liberty will win the day. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Shevitz. Please welcome Bishop Darrell Husband, Sr. from Mount Olivet Church.
Rabbi, I have to have you come over and preach some Sunday. That was awesome. I don't know why they picked me to follow you. To the rabbi and congregation of Beth Ahabah and visiting friends, I do want to start by saying this. I know Amy's niece. I know what Amy's niece feels like. I have lived 64 years in that skin. The definition of religious liberty is the freedom to believe and exercise or act upon religious conscience without unnecessary interference by the government. The first 16 words of the First Amendment have two protections for religion: the prohibition on an establishment of religion keeps the government from advancing or privileging religion, keeps the government from unnecessarily interfering with religious practices, neither helping nor hurting religion, but allowing people to practice their religion or not to practice religion at all. That said, it does not keep the government, which is made up of people who strangely are elected there to represent the masses, from discriminating against religions, and that is what I call an interesting tension. If we look microscopically at the history of this nation, which presented itself at birth as one of the world's most amazing ideals to model, we find that it failed to be pure if not in its ideology, surely in its praxis. All men were never created equal in the eyes of men who, in idolatry, have the audacity to paint a portrait of their creator in a false image to promote self and ethnic supremacy. Two cultures of truly spiritual people have also been the longest and most despised people in all, I said in all the world. Years ago, I had the opportunity to visit Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Remembrance Center. And while I was there viewing and devastated by the terrible, traumatizing treatment of humanity by humanity, I was confused and confounded by the fact that it was initiated by Germany and opposed by the same America that had initiated its own Holocaust, destruction, catastrophic annihilation of another culture. Extermination by gas was not the method of killing, though. It was extermination by humiliation, by castration, and dehumanization. When freedom was mandated, then it became this: accept assimilation or a master plan of depopulation. Those are your only choices. We are too fearful of addressing these kind of things, these kind of issues in our society. We have tolerated hate for so long, because truth be told, it has been the fuel for our success. Discrimination has not been an enemy to our economic growth. It has really been a friend. Money and power have always trumped human decency, and unfortunately, even in the religious world. We should put most of what we have called our quote-unquote gods, the God of evangelicalism, the God of our founding fathers. I know that causes some trepidation and some challenges for some of us, but who used a name but did not know his heart. We should probably put all those kind of gods in one room. They may actually all kill each other. We could have a funeral service and bury them all, then start all over with the God who said, "Let us make man in our image, from our character, many colors of outer complexion." And even as Acts chapter 17 and verse 26 says, "of one blood." In Christ, there is no difference between Jew and Gentiles who have been grafted in. I do not mean to be offensive in this statement, yet I'm convinced that politicians who have no spiritual grounding, obviously we're not talking about any who are present, cannot transform a society that mercilessly wars with one another without a heart or desire to hear because of skin and cultural differences. Their commitment cannot be to a party politics, but to the kingdom of God alone. Why? Their foundation is generally law and winning by any means necessary. And it cannot, I say it cannot any longer, it cannot be about good speeches that have little action behind it. The battle we have can only be won in the spiritual realm through an authentic love, where Isaac and Ishmael meet their descendant Jesus and become wedded as one. Law and grace, redemption by blood. There was a young lady soldier in that center, of a Holocaust center, and I asked her a question. As she was standing there viewing right alongside of me, I asked her a question. I said to her, "Why are you here?" And she said to me, "So we never forget. It's a part of my training. Every soldier has to come here so we never forget." And then she turned and asked me, "Sir, why are you here?" And my response sounded like an echo. I looked her in the eyes and I said to her, "So we never forget either." You see, to forget your Holocaust is to forget mine. We share a pain that is common. We share a despising that is similar. We share a fight that must be fought together. It is fought in the spiritual realm. My foundation as a Christian is born out of Judaism. To offend you is to offend me. You are family. Until you are no longer haunted and hated, neither will we be. I am a Jew, not by ethnicity, but by circumcision of the heart. My prayer today is that the nations of the world will one day become blind to seeing life through the lenses of our culture or our ethnicity, but truly seeing through the eyes of the God of the Holy Scripture. God bless you.
Thank you, Bishop Husband. Now please welcome Reverend Daniel Glaze from the River Road Church.
Good evening. Bishop, I have had Rabbi Hal Shevitz preach in my congregation, and I highly recommend the experience. I'm thankful for your gracious invitation to be present with you today, and I'm humbled by all of those alongside whom I have been invited to speak. I must admit that I'm more than just a bit hesitant to stand before you. I have not experienced the level of hate that many of you have. I've not experienced the discrimination based on who I am. And at a time like this, at a national reckoning on matters of racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, all manner of bigotry and injustice, frankly, I feel as if I ought to sit down and listen rather than stand up here in front and ask to be heard. What's more, I feel a bit like a fish out of water. I'm not an experienced politician. I'm not a learned statesperson with all of the answers to world peace. So I offer what I have, a spirit of love for each one of you, and encouragement from a pastor in the work of love and justice before us. Friends, I have been encouraged in my own work for justice by what I have heard today. I trust that you have been encouraged as well. Even still, I wonder whether there might be those among us who might ask whether what we are doing today makes any difference at all. That is, what difference, one might ask, would gathering together a few hundred people on a Sunday evening near downtown Richmond, hearing speakers, offering prayers of lament and calls for justice, what good does any of this do to soften the hardened hearts of those hell-bent on hate? Are we doing anything? I understand that sentiment. I know full well that standing up for love in the face of overwhelming hate can sometimes feel like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. As we seek to bear light in this world, it's all too easy to be overcome by the darkness of bigotry and anti-Semitism all around us. When it feels as if despair is winning the day, we may be tempted to ask that insightful yet haunting question that the Israelites asked in Exodus chapter 17. Is the Lord among us or not? With the violence and hate all around us, is the Lord among us or not? Well, what's the answer to that question? Family, I believe we are the answer to that question. We answer that question by how we live, by how we love, by how we treat others with kindness and respect. Is the Lord among us or not? We answer that question by what we do today here in this gathering. We answer that question with our unified declaration that in our city, love reigns because hate has no home here. Do not be fooled, loved ones, into thinking that what we are doing here is of no importance. Please do not think that you are present today simply to hear a few speakers, take some pictures with some dignitaries, and then the real work of dismantling bigotry begins sometime later. No, this gathering matters. Your presence here matters. You are doing something by your witness here today. See, in my tradition, the Christian tradition, in the first chapter of the book of Acts, Jesus says that we shall witness to God's remarkable love, quote, in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. In other words, we begin at home. By God's grace and with God's power, we begin here in Richmond. We begin here in this beautiful house of worship. We begin right here within our hearts. The Hebrew and Christian scriptures are clear. We are called to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, no exceptions. This is our work. And so we strive for justice on behalf of God's entire family, which includes every human being created in the image of God. That also means that we are not afraid of those who peddle in fear and bow down to the false idols of anti-Semitism and white supremacy. No, we even love them. We work to show them a better way. We work to meet hate with love. We meet war with peace. We meet bitter division with beloved community. In all things, we work to bring forth God's justice on earth as it is in heaven. May it be so. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Glaze. Now please welcome Charles Turner, General Secretary of the Islamic Center of Virginia.
It is always tough being the layman that has to follow all the clergy at these types of events, but I will do my best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace and blessings of God be upon us all. It is with great honor and great affection that I stand here today representing the Islamic Center of Virginia to stand against anti-Semitism and bigotry in all of its manifestations. Our communities, the Muslim and the Jewish communities, along with so many others, are no strangers to prejudice. And unfortunately, this wave of prejudice is incessant, though it has certainly become more emboldened in these last few years. What was once uttered in hushed tones and quiet whispers is now projected into our public spaces and has become a part of our political discourse. It brings me tremendous grief when I reflect on just how similar our experiences of our two communities have been. I have heard the stories of Jewish families that fear to walk down these very streets of our great city for fear of anti-Semitic slurs being thrown at them from passing traffic. And I can't help but think of the Muslims who have anglicized their names, of the women who have removed their hijab out of fear, of the men who have shaved their beards, of the elders in our community who fear to wear the traditional clothing of their homelands with the hope that they will not be recognized as followers of Islam. And I appreciate what the Reverend just said, and I should share with you that these are not my experiences, because Charles Turner too passes in this society. And that I too sometimes don't feel that I should be up here speaking for any community that I don't share those experiences with. And I remember the agony following the shootings at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pennsylvania and the shootings that took place at Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand. In a sense, our communities can look at each other and it is as if we are staring into a mirror of loss and trauma. And yet, through the persistence of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and in the wake of such tragic events, which happen all too often, we have grown resilient. And we have grown to rely on and trust in one another. I was just reminded as we sat here that in response to waves and waves of anti-Muslim sentiment and Islamophobic rhetoric as it was cropping up in our society, that clergy members of the Richmond area came together and they formed a program called Standing Together, in which they stood together on behalf of the Muslim community. And I was reminded that that first event took place in these very halls. So we owe a debt of gratitude not just to the Jewish community, but to this space and to this community in particular at Beth Ahabah. When tragedy strikes our community, the Islamic Center of Virginia knows that the Jewish community will be the first to stand beside us, to share with us in a prayer, to provide a shoulder to lean on. And I pray that our community will forever stand and pray with our Abrahamic brethren in your time of need. At times, we may feel that the bonds between our communities are under the weight of these hostilities abroad. From the contentious issues of international affairs, which lay far beyond our control. And I believe that we're under no illusion that we may understand these situations from different perspectives, and we may reach different conclusions. And yet, if I may quote a fellow Virginia President Thomas Jefferson, and I pray, Bishop, you won't think me a man of idolatry, but I appreciated his quote when he said, "I never considered a difference of opinion in politics, religion, or philosophy as cause for withdrawing from a friend." I wholeheartedly believe that these days shall come to pass. Allah tells us in the Holy Quran that with every hardship comes ease, and that He will never place a burden upon our shoulders which we cannot bear. The future of our communities, I believe, is bright. And at the Islamic Center of Virginia, we look forward to the growing friendship between our communities, in which meals are shared instead of tears. And together we continue to contribute not only to the friendship between us, but to the betterment of this society, because our communities have much to contribute to America. Thank you very much, Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. And now our last guest speaker, Jonathan Zur, CEO, Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities.
Good evening. I am so grateful to Congregation Beth Ahabah for your hospitality, as always, and to the Jewish Community Federation of Richmond for your decades of partnership with the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities and for your invitation to be here this evening. I echo so much of what has been said by so many other speakers. It means so much to hear elected officials and religious leaders, community leaders, coming together to clearly and forcefully stand up to the scourge of anti-Semitism and stand together with one another. I've been reflecting and thinking about this evening's event on a few past events. It was about 10 years ago when the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities presented our humanitarian award to Alexander Levenstein, of blessed memory, and of Dr. Alex B. James in the same evening. Dr. A.B. James, for folks who don't know, was president of Virginia Union University, a critical leader in addressing racism in our community, somebody who stood up as a student at Virginia Union, and then as an administrator and ultimately as president, stood with Virginia Union students during a time of sit-ins and segregation, working for justice and peace. And Dr. James spoke first that evening, and he spoke about his first hours in Richmond, the hate that he faced, not being able to get a meal, not being able to find transportation. And then a few minutes later, it was maybe more than a few minutes, the speech went a little over time. A few minutes later, Alexander Levenstein, a Holocaust survivor, came up to speak and said, "Dr. James, I know what you speak of." Alexander Levenstein was the only survivor from his town in Germany. And after incredible pain and suffering, he made it his life's mission, as Dr. James did, to work for justice, to work for peace, to stand up in the face of bigotry in our communities. Their example inspires me every day. And as Charles noted, it was a little over 5 years ago when we gathered in this very sanctuary to kick off the Standing Together initiative, a commitment to combat bigotry and prejudice in all forms against all targeted communities. And what folks don't know about that event is that behind the scenes there was a lot of campaigning about which venue would host that kickoff event. there were a number of religious leaders who said, we want to be the host. And it's the Rabbi Emeritus here at Congregation Beth Ahabah, Rabbi Byfield, who won the day. I thought it was an incredible example of standing up and saying that it's critical that the 6th oldest synagogue in the United States stands in solidarity with our Muslim brothers and sisters when they are targeted. As I think about those two experiences, I'm struck by the fact that they are far too often the exception rather than the norm. And that what we need to do, each of us, each day, is normalize a commitment to build bridges of understanding, to build relationships characterized not by fear of the quote-unquote other, but by an ability to see the humanity in faces that might not look like our own. And understanding that just because it was not my experience, as you describe it, doesn't mean that your experience is not true. That I need to hear you, I need to understand you, and then together we can co-create a world in which the hate and the hurt and the pain that so many are experiencing due to anti-Semitism and so many other forms of prejudice don't have to face anymore. That's the work we do every day at the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, working with schools and workplaces, facilitating dialogues and forums for over 30,000 Virginians this year to help people to build the bridges of understanding and respect. But let me be clear that it is not VCIC's work alone. There are so many others who are doing their part to combat bigotry in public and behind the scenes ways. It's going to take all of those efforts, sustained, committed, persistent, to be able to see the outcome where we don't have to gather like this in the face of anti-Semitism or other forms of bigotry, but instead we can come together in community to celebrate our shared humanity. I believe there is no more important work in our time. As the grandson of Holocaust survivors, as the son of an immigrant to this country, it chills me to know that members of our Jewish community here in Richmond in 2021 face harassment and face vandalism based on who they are. We must do better, all of us, every single day. So know that the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities will always be here with you when moments like this arise. We will always be working to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. But I also hope with every fiber of my being, that we don't have to go to events like this anymore. Let it be so, but only if we make it so.
Wow, what a powerful evening. I'm Ellen Renee Adams, and I'm privileged to be the president of the Jewish Community Federation of Richmond. We are here today because we will not to surrender to hate of any kind. We will not be victims. We will speak up and speak out against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. We are here today, joined by the entire Richmond community, to proclaim together that we have each other's backs. In Hebrew, we say hineni, we are here, because we are standing up and we are proud to be Jewish. We come in all colors, shapes, backgrounds, and political views. We have survived the unthinkable for thousands of years. We are strong people. We take care of each other. We lift up our fellow man, and we work every day to ensure a bright and safe future for all of us. Kol harevim zeh b'zeh. All Jews are responsible one for the other. I am inspired to see such broad support for our community. We may disagree on issues, but if you look around, you'll see that we're all in this together. May we go from strength to strength.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight. My name is Daniel Staffenberg. I'm LNA's professional partner at the Jewish Community Federation of Richmond, and Cantor and Rabbi, who I believe is watching from camp. There is a bunch of speeches that I had written that now I can't go because you go last with this group, and there's not much left to say. Let me say ideally that this would not be the first time we gather again in person after the pandemic. We're supposed to be together in joy and partnership. And I came in today nervous about how we bring together. Should this be the first gathering that we bring our Jewish and interfaith partners together? But I am leaving more inspired than I thought I could. The task we have heard, we are joined in by so many here and hundreds watching on our live broadcast. Today is the start of the journey. The Jewish community has been fighting against anti-Semitism for decades. Today, as you heard, we have partners in that fight, and our work begins today to continue to educate, to learn from each other, to bring people together to Israel, to learn about each other, and to make this world a better place as we are mandated. I want to thank you all for being here with us. I want to thank all of our speakers. I'm going to forgo naming everybody, although I do want to bring some attention to some special people who are with us. Delegate Van Valkenburg, thank you so much for being here. And RICO Attorney Shannon Taylor, thank you so much. And for so many of the delegates who voiced their support and either couldn't be here or sent us messages, we are grateful. Additionally, we got a wonderful message from the Embassy of Israel. They had a major visit coming in. They had hoped to be here standing with us, and they are here with us as well. Lastly, at the Jewish Community Federation, we don't do anything alone. We are blessed. We are an amazing team, and I have to say thank you to David Cohen. David, will you stand up, please? Stand up. David is our JCRC director. He has jumped in with both feet and leads our advocacy efforts. When you get the email from him asking you to contact your congressman, your local delegate, to join us in an advocacy forum, or most importantly, to learn from each other, please click yes. We are doing important work to move our community forward. To our entire Jewish Community Federation team, I am grateful and inspired by our work. Thank you for pulling this together, in a short time. And for all of you for being with us tonight, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.